All right. Welcome, Ronald Meijers. Thank you so much for your valuable time today. We already had a little chit chat, so I know your life is never, just an easy flow of things, but
Never a dull
it's
moment,
never a
indeed.
dull moment. There's a lot of things going on, so in that sense, always a good time to talk, I guess. To introduce you a bit for the audience that might not know you yet, is that you're an experienced executive and board advisor, worked for Fortune 500 family-owned enterprises, universities, and government as board member, facilitated coach and change and leadership expert, and have been a non-executive for more than 26 years. You're also the co-author of the book Leadership Agility: Develop Your Leadership Repertoire of Leadership Styles, which were also very interesting to know more about. Um, Very nice to catch up again. And we met, let's say, 2.5 years ago by me reaching out to you. I just started to work for a Big Four company that you've worked for as well, Big Four consultancy firm, well known maybe for the audience. And I was having, I got the role of a specialist lead, as they call it, on culture, leadership, and behavior. And I had the honor and pleasure to tap into a lot of your legacy, the congruence model, leadership agility styles, and so on. And I reached out to you to pick your brain a bit, like how to approach it in a, maybe consultancy world that is not always very open to for interventions that are maybe perceived as more vague or soft. Maybe I shouldn't even say that because then it becomes
Oh,
self-fulfilling. But for how to become, how to actually sell it within the organization, also for clients. So that's a bit of the context. And at the moment, you're vice chairman of a board of directors and in a merger at the moment as we speak. Very curious to hear about your own experience, also in your leadership styles. And you're also an adjunct professor at TIA's School for Business and Societies. So a lot of beautiful things on your plate. But maybe before I proceed, really love to hear, a little bit of your journey. Like, who is Ronald? How did you get into this, this passion, if I can call it like that, of leadership
yes.
development in this fast-changing world?
Yeah, well, I think it has been indeed after I finished my university studies, and even I would say up and until that time, I really didn't know what I was good at, wanted to do, felt passionate about. So I was more or less cruising at the time. And then started working for indeed a leadership and sales development company called Crowdrunner, and discovered that indeed this was the area that I felt most connected to. And I always took what I taught quite seriously, so I definitely wanted to practice it as much as possible, as well as helping others practice it. So I became the managing director of the Dutch firm relatively shortly after I joined. And since then, I basically have been able to combine, we call it the practice of leadership, i.e., all varieties of management and board roles, with the development of leadership in the shape of, by the way, also as a leader, you should develop other leaders in your firm, but also outside as a board advisor and as a supervisory board member. So I sort of had a nice triangle. And in the midst of that triangle, I always did as much as possible research about, both via experiments in my assignments, always, of course, with the involvement of the other. Eh? So you cannot do an experiment if the other doesn't know it's an experiment. That's not fair. But also
Ethical experiments.
by reading as much as there is to be read on the subject. And I think the passion is a bit a combination of humanizing organizations and let's say democratizing leadership. That's a bit of and these are two parts of the same coin, if you wish, two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. I don't think you can really have positive, responsible, bespoke transformational leadership without having a human-based organization. Otherwise, there's always something not working, something incongruent, something inconsistent, something hypocritical even. So anyway, that's sort of what I'm working at.
Yeah, beautiful. So before we tap into the to your professionalism, maybe little sneak peek into your well, childhood or when you were younger. Do you see any because you started off with saying I was not really sure what I was good at. I was
No,
kind of cruising. I actually really resonate with that because I liked a lot of things, but it was never really specific, and therefore I didn't know what was really my trait, my asset. I'm not sure if that was the same for you, but what if you look back, do you see some things that you were drawn to as a child that you just did by default, or your role in the family system or with your friends that actually, yeah, it's kind of a copy paste of who you still are, but now you can amplify it maybe and make it your
yeah,
strength?
sure. So some of that is definitely idealism. Something about, you call it visionary, or call it dreamer, call it idealistic. Something of that is certainly sort of, I think in Dutch we have an expression, huh? It was spooned into you with the porridge, a spoon. And it's sort of, that was what had happened, because I, as a child already, was part of putting sugarcane sugar from, let's say, from one rum bag into another, even if it was hardened. Anyway, my family was always involved in trying to improve society. My mother and father both were. They also set the example, I should say, as I think you need to bring out the best, bring out the most. You have to sweat your talents. And if you don't know the direction of that talents yet, I found out that I was much more concerned than inspired in most cases, because there was this vague notion of, yes, I want to change the world. I want to be, part of the solution, part of the future. But I was reading stuff about the Paulo Freire, the explosion of the world population, and the fact that we could never ever feed all those mouths sustainably. But I had no clue what I could contribute. So as I remember as a child, I was sort of torn between, the idea that I wanted to have clear direction, but and felt it had to be idealistic. I was going to be a change agent, but I had no clue how.
Mhm.
And and I was lucky in the sense that I, I was, yeah, lucky in the sense that I never really trumped. Yeah, maybe also not lucky. I was thinking, why do I say I was lucky? Because I finished, for example, I finished studying law, even if with hindsight I shouldn't have, probably.
Mhm.
My girlfriend at the time was studying psychology and pedagogics, and I read those books. Whilst my legal books, I sort of studied with the purpose of doing an exam. But I never decided, well, maybe I should stop this and then, return and start anew
Good.
with something else. So I had this dogged determination to finish, even if I
Mhm.
knew. So that
It's
was a
also
bit different.
maybe even a what kind of if I maybe even a pity that well, in my time, but maybe in yours more, studies were pretty siloed, right? There were certain
Yeah,
disciplines and they
absolutely.
would not interact and integrate.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's why I love the museum, Tyler's Museum in Harlem a lot, because there you can see how the encyclopedia is next to
Yeah.
the biological section and so forth.
No, I totally agree there.
And but you do see the tendency that things get combined again. So
Yeah.
today you have planet studies. I'm like,
Yes.
wow,
Yeah.
I wanted to study that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
But if I look indeed, if I look at university studies there that combine legal, economic, political, and psychological studies, wow, that's what I would have wanted to do.
Bring me
If
back
I
in
would have been
time.
smart enough to enter at the time, you never know. Huh? But
No,
I
I
don't.
wouldn't doubt.
It's certainly about. I don't remember feeling very well, very happy on the inside, but I somehow was able to project a more happy part of myself to the outside world. So And then people sort of leave you alone because you look as if you're happy, so you're probably happy. So you're cruising along. I think
Mm.
that's sort of how it felt. And
Yeah.
I have big admiration for both my father and my mother. My mother was, for example, I think a good example. She wanted to be the first in the family to go to university, but as a girl, she was not allowed.
Yeah.
And I think she was allowed to do studies to go to become a teacher. In Dutch, we think the Pedagogische Academie. But she was not allowed to go to university, which she really wanted. And
Mm.
she would have definitely been better off in a more theoretical than in a sort of mixed practical theoretical job than where she ended up. She was good in designing so educational material,
Wow.
but she was not necessarily great at managing a group.
Mm.
So you see, I think, but she nevertheless, she persisted. She kept on working. So I was used to having a mother who worked in the 60s already, and that was so she was really so a change agent of her time. So I'm really
Yeah,
proud of
wow.
her.
That's a great that
Yeah,
must be contagious as well.
yeah,
Um,
it definitely is. Yeah,
Nice. So, what maybe it's a bit of a blunt, out of the blue question, but you already mentioned the balance between humanizing, or the same side of the coin, that humanized organizations need to have democratized ways of filling in the
really.
roles of
Yeah,
leadership.
yeah,
So do you have a certain definition that works for you at the moment, or is that the
certainly.
definition?
For leadership, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So leading basically is motivating people, mobilizing people to move in a certain direction because they want to and not because they have to. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about enticing, seducing, influencing, cajoling, convincing, what have you. So everything, but in with the intent of moving together in a certain direction because both of you want to, not because you have to. So that it's always a dyad, we say dyadic part. So it's always two sides of the coin. And if you look at other, I think there was again a woman who was the one who put that into writing very, very powerfully already in the beginning of the 19th, in the 20th century. Mary Parker Follett. She was a polymath and a social worker. She was, for example, also advising President Roosevelt at the time. Her works have been translated, and Peter Drucker, who is often named as the guru of management gurus, uh, received a lot of his inspiration from her. And
Hmm.
one thing that I believe, I think it summarizes her work. Of course, it doesn't never do justice to it all, but she also already said leadership is a function of of human interaction. So you can never lead if nobody
Yeah.
else follows.
Yeah.
So it's always
Or leads, right?
sorry.
Or leads, follow and leading.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
yeah.
You can never lead if nobody else is following, and you can never lead if you don't learn to follow, because nobody
Yeah,
is always a leader or always a
exactly.
follower. And the
Yeah.
whole idea that that you have an individual who is a great leader, you can never, in my view, disconnect that from the context. So people are not always leaders. You could say they have certain traits that makes it more probable. We'll talk about that later for sure.
Yeah.
That they get the opportunity to move a group of people in a shared direction willingly. But if you look at some examples of people who use coercion or downright some manipulation to get people to move in a certain direction by not telling the truth systematically, there is a certain person who has had the world record of lying to his people 30,000 plus times in 4 years. And and that's not leadership, that's
Mm.
manipulation, because
Mm.
you cannot expect people to willingly follow you if you paint a picture of both of reality and of the future that is deliberately sort of based on nonsense,
Yeah. And when people
on
are also
false truth.
dependent of the system, right? If they're in it, and
Certainly, we all
yeah,
are to a large
yeah,
extent. We're all
yeah.
part of it. We co-create it. We are dependent of it. We make it. And there's always this duality, this
Mm,
dyadic relationship. You know, it's
yeah.
never one-sided, and
And
you cannot lead without others allowing you or sort of
yeah.
endorsing you to lead.
And maybe we will dive into the leadership styles a bit later on, but often I'm sure you get this question often as well, like when managers or leaders kind of have the challenge that
Yeah,
they work with operations. It's not always operations, but that's 9 out of the 10 times the case. And
yeah.
they say, yeah, those people, they love what they do. They very hands-on and they like to execute and they go home and they have the families and friends. They don't need to have a sense of belonging. It's not that they want to work in a transactional way per se, but it's just how they organize their life, maybe simplified, not too complex. And I'm not even talking about the differences of countries, right? In the United States, I think most people are a bit more transactional, if I can put it that way, because there is very little support system. Your health security is dependent on your firm, so you cannot have all the requirements of I need belonging, I need purpose, I need, well, you have a big
Well, yeah,
family going on.
no,
I'm just curious, I'm putting things a bit black
you
and
put a lot
white.
of things in
Yeah,
this
systemic
statement. Like
mind.
let's start with the beginning. I think you
Thanks.
started with the manager and the
Yeah.
execution orientation. I think that's also leadership, huh? It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's just leadership that is more or less if it is leadership. I think you can have people in leadership positions. We call them managers, and we hope that the people in leadership positions do actually know how to lead. But the fact that your primary focus is, for example, on execution and less so on exploration or on trying out new ventures, or more, I think, exploitation versus exploration is one of the paradoxes we talk about in our book. I think there's nothing wrong with that if that is your
Mm-hmm.
primary orientation, as long as you're aware of the fact that it's part of the solution, and therefore you should always be open to a minimum amount of renewal. Otherwise, you know, you get stuck in the same hole and you never get out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
this whole notion of transactional versus transformational, I think transactional is not about leadership. It's about buying and selling. It's about carrots and sticks, and it's never enough. Not
Mm-hmm.
even for people who grow up like you argue in a more transactional environment where you know carrots and sticks are more prevalent than, for example, in more, if you wish, value-driven societies or more principle societies. But if you mix those two, I don't think necessarily that that per se means that leading in that context is more effective in a
Mm-hmm.
transactional way, because as we all know, sociological things have the tendency to be generic, and they pretty much never fit to a certain individual or a certain context. So
Mm-hmm.
they can sort of warn you for the possibility that something might be more likely than something else, but it's a totally different recursion level than the psychological level. I think if you and I work together, whether we're in America or in China, doesn't really matter at that moment. It depends on what we want to accomplish together. And
Mm-hmm.
so we talk about stakeholder management, awareness of the context, of course. But I think the idea that purpose in itself, also in the US, makes a hell of a difference, a heck of a difference for your performance. It's very true there as well as anybody anywhere else. Same in China.
Yeah, it's kind of a
Research.
universal
It's just
truth.
it's a
Yeah.
universal need to think to be part of something bigger, to contribute to something that is more than just making a living. If you get there, huh? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you're just making a living is, but it's of course it's a prerequisite. But if
Yeah.
you get the chance to do something more, most people, irrespective of where they grew up, are willing or even motivated to do so.
Yeah. So if you very much, let's say, going back to that case, that manager that has a lot of, let's say, operational people around him or
Yeah,
her,
yeah.
and your premise is kind of democratizing of leadership. Do you also mean that leadership, everyone has everyone can be a leader or that can be developed or needs to be part of that leadership. Is that also what you mean to be
No, I
successful
think
as an
depending
organization?
that here probably the distinction between leadership as a profession or leadership as a personality trait
Mm-hmm.
should be sort of made, because yes, I believe that we all lead literally our own lives. So it helps to do that with a certain amount of, proactivity and a certain amount of awareness of your goals and etc. So being aware of what you want to achieve and knowing how you can influence that, so making the distinction between what you can and cannot influence, it's healthy for everybody, irrespective of what you make into your job. But if you talk about leadership as a profession, I don't think necessarily everybody is suited
Mm-hmm.
for leadership as a profession.
Yeah.
Very often, by the way, people in management jobs today are not suited for leadership as a profession because we have a very good system to produce to make sure the wrong people get the leadership
Promoted.
jobs.
Yeah. Is
Because
that
we
has
have
to
all
do with
sorts
the
of assumptions
promotion?
about what good leadership is that don't work.
Mm.
Estimates vary, but between 60 to 80% of people in leadership jobs are the sort of not necessarily fit for those jobs. They are fit for something else, but we have a lot of, if you wish, perverted incentives to become a manager,
Mm.
money, status, what have you. So if you connect money and status to also to expert roles, for example, that will
Yeah,
already
exactly.
make a big difference.
Yeah, that's what had in
Um,
mind as well. That because to be a specialist seems like you're on a
yeah,
plateau and not growing in terms
no,
of
but it's
rewards.
thought leadership is
Yeah,
also a way to lead.
yeah.
You don't have to necessarily have the formal responsibility over a group of people to be called a leader.
Mm-hmm.
But then
Yeah.
leadership as a profession, I think that is in the essence. Do you have what it takes to mobilize a group of people to move in a certain direction because they want to and not because they have to?
Yeah. And if the manager will speak with you and after that his boss again and or her boss and asks you, hey, we want to have self-leading teams.
Yeah.
Help us, Ronald. What would you say or do or question?
Well, I think self-leading, if you mean 100% autonomous, that's an illusion. Huh? So if you think that self-leading means you don't have any guidelines or guardrails or limitations anymore, that's nonsense. But if you mean that you want to shape a group of people that take initiative, take responsibility more than just for the square centimeter that they have been assigned to do, and that they actually help each other and co-create the goals rather than wait until somebody tells them what the goals should be. That's very possible, and it's actually very human to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know many people who love to be told what to do by default. They get used to it because they feel that every time they take an initiative, it's not necessarily appreciated. Because
Mm-hmm.
people say, I'm the boss, I'm calling the shots. And you don't have to tell that to many people a lot of times before they stop thinking for themselves. So
Mm.
most of the times it's a lot of stop doing this, this, and this, and then already you make a big difference, and the self leadership of the team increases dramatically. And that's what we call democratizing leadership. I think if I'm the formal leader of a group, it doesn't necessarily mean that I always have to chair the meetings, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's probably a very ineffective thing to do. So the fact that I can take the decisions also doesn't necessarily mean that I always have to take the decisions. I can explicitly say, you take the decision. And I
Mm-hmm.
can take the decision to withdraw that authority from you when not necessarily up for the job after a number of attempts,
Mm.
as,
And
as much as you want.
I'm gonna challenge you a little bit, right?
Oh, no,
Or maybe
challenge
not
as much
even.
as you want.
But yeah, I think we're on the same line. That's not an issue. I just wonder because sometimes I had the experience that people are a bit more like working for the same organization for 20 years. It feels like a family company. They
Yeah,
have their own royalty, how do you say, the kingdoms, I should say.
yeah,
They
yeah.
create it. They're a bit of intangible.
Thief shops.
Uh, And they're not per se in leadership roles, the designated ones. And if you say, hey, why don't you chair this meeting? Of course, you give a bit more of context. They could say things like, yeah, but you get paid for that, and that's your responsibility.
Yeah,
And I feel like, okay,
that's
where's,
old pain, as if you ask me.
yeah, I
It's
feel that
old pain.
too.
That's the cynicism that is the result of a whole lot of disappointments in those 20 years that you described. I'm
Yeah.
convinced.
hmm Because it's not
Or maybe even
human.
before.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessary. If you look at a child of 5, for example, I go back to how we were before we got trained by society. You see, then of course there's a whole difference between children who are more extroverted and less and more introverted. And but they all, when in the right context, when given something that they really need, they all take free action. They all more or less openly share what they want, even in ways that parents don't always appreciate. That's exactly where it starts.
Yeah.
Well, I think you go back to how creative and open for learning we used to be. It's always there, and of course, with the exception. But yeah, I've had a similar example with, for example, I had a group of captains from large ships who were used to recruiting, let's say, large amounts of people from various countries, not necessarily all what we call the Western world. And he said, well, I told him, why don't you ask them what they think is a good idea? So he came back the first time and said, well, I asked them, what do you think? And they said, yes, sir. I said, okay. And then what did you do? Then I started doing what I thought was a good idea because they didn't get an answer. I said, okay. So you didn't give them a second, a third, and a fourth, and a fifth chance. So you didn't necessarily convince them that you were actually open for a suggestion.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know how many times they've had the experience that managers are not open for suggestions. So you have to triple that amount to convince them that you're a different breed altogether.
There's
Don't
no
give up
trap.
so easily. Yeah, it's a transformation. So, and if something can be called a transformation, then typically, you have a bit more patience, perhaps, and also a bit more passion for the purpose that you're serving. So asking it once, it's just a start.
It's not a fake stakeholder participation
Yeah,
move
exactly.
that you
We
often
want
have.
you to feel you are committed.
Yeah, the
I
windmills are
really want
already
to
in your
commit.
backyard, but
Yeah,
then they ask you,
yeah,
how do you feel about it? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
You have to mean it.
right. And do you have another example from your practice, or maybe at the top of your mind, if you have to, well, embrace maybe even cynicism and people are not that willing to engage? Because from my worldview, everyone wants to engage and be co-creative and
Yeah.
yeah
Well, that's what you
and
want, right? Yeah,
yeah, that's what you hope. But when you get this kind of other kind of energy, you said patience, be yeah, intrinsically motivated yourself and open to listen and have
exactly.
empathy, I guess.
And look at the
Uh,
emotions behind their behaviors. So, for
right.
example, I would say cynicism has a lot of characteristics that you could call it's frozen grief.
Hmm.
They are sad, they are disappointed, they felt over and over again they were not taken seriously, and they gave up. And that's when you become cynical. You don't believe anymore that people in leadership positions actually have your best interests at heart, as well
Hmm.
as their own, by the way.
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
don't believe it anymore. And then that's what you need to fix. So how do you do that?
Hmm.
If people have lost faith, and then how do that takes a while. Huh?
Hmm.
If they're fundamentally still grieving about all the not so nice things that happened to them, yeah, then
That
uh,
requires kind of coaching skills
exactly.
also, right?
Yeah,
That's maybe.
and not just on an individual level. There's more that you need to do, I think. One
Mm-hmm.
of the first things that you definitely have to do for any transformation is you need to create a common narrative, a story, a compelling vision, something. If you're talking about a direction that you think that you all want to go. I think there's multiple examples of even, let's say, the most lethargic of cultures and the most cynical groups. If you ask them in the end, seriously, okay, don't you ever dream of a better future, of a better context, of a better organization? Is there nothing in you that that still has something to say about what we should improve here? Oh, yes. Okay, now let's start there. So, if it was up to you, what would you do different? What would be a good outcome? What would you wish for this group or this society or this organization to become better at or to change? And then typically if you have that patience and that perseverance, answers start to come. And then what do you
Mm.
do with those? Right? You put them in a narrative and you come back to them. Is this what you mean? Yeah, yeah, more or less. Okay, I put it in different words, but is this what you can relate to? And then it starts. And then of course you have to be very consistent or congruent with
Yeah.
in your decisions with those things. And you definitely will make mistakes. So you have to create a feedback system surrounding that, and you have to ask for a lot of feedback yourself, because
Mm.
the invisible threshold in the door of any manager needs to be managed by you. You need to show them that it's safe to enter and it's safe to say whatever that's on their minds, and that is not an easy feat, I would say. So there's a lot of things you have to do
Yeah.
simultaneously to make sure it can actually start to become, yeah, a generative, a positive, a human organization.
Yeah.
You see often that, like, when I joined ABAP 4 years ago almost, and I
For
asked,
listeners, that's the
it's an
accountancy.
accountancy and advisory firm.
Yeah. Right.
It's not just accountancy, it's also consulting, financial consulting, tax advisory, and audit and accounting. Yes, it's about 700 people. And today we have, by the way, we've created AF, and AAF, and it's a similar organization, also advisory and accountants. And but when I started at ABAP, the feedback that I received from the Workers' Council was that this organization was managed mostly by Excel and
Mm.
focused on efficiency and making as much money as possible. And it was not necessarily built to be a favorable, attractive, magnetic, inspirational, engaging environment. Not at all.
Yeah.
And so 3.5 years later, more or less, I asked, okay, how is it now compared to how it was? And I basically think, yeah, we talk about people instead of Excel sheets.
Nice.
It's
Yeah.
it's far from perfect, the organization, but there's a fundamental shift, and I don't think the answer would have come much earlier than after 3 to 4 years.
Mm.
And there's
It
still
takes
probably
time.
still people who don't believe it.
Mhm.
I
So
think,
you helped it transform, if I can put it that way, to
yeah,
become more human-centric. And do the employees also long for that?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Some
Because if
more
they if
than
they
others. Huh?
are really comfortable with Excel sheets and having the
I'm
truth
not
in their
against
hands,
tools, huh?
no, no.
It's just that they're tools.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. Like
Yeah,
money,
that's
I'm not
ever.
against. I'm not against making money. But money is a means to an end. If
Mm-hmm.
means become the goal, everybody gets confused. It's the same as when I, as a board member, focus on getting more power. Power in itself becomes my objective. Then you know what happens. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
It's not good. It's not healthy. And the same is true for money. The same is true for perks. The same is true for podium. All
Yeah.
those things that are means to an end. Perks are there to facilitate some extra complicated tasks that you might have,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they're not meant to enhance your ego. or to
Right.
boost your profile. But that's what they could become very easily.
Yeah, I would love to dive into that, to the current well, transformation you might be in with this merger of
Yeah,
the two companies. But before we tap into that, you already tapped a bit on what the 5 roles that leaders can take upon themselves.
yeah,
You talked about, I think, role model behavior, right? Creating a mission or a
yeah,
vision that people find appealing, or they have a say in it, and they feel co-owner. And there's also this meaning maker role,
yeah,
and that's more mission driven. I think that's more
indeed.
also focused on output. Is that the difference between the
That's,
role
yeah, it's on values, and
values?
focused is finally on whose dream are you after, eh? Whose mission are you following? So
And
it's
then the
about the who and the
strategist,
why.
yeah, and then the strategist role, and the
That's about,
organizer and the
yeah,
coach.
exactly. And so if you put them in sort of a more or less logical order,
Mm-hmm.
and recent research confirms this, it starts with the role model.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't spend enough time to demonstrate the behaviors yourself that you want others to emulate or to show up, then you are in trouble. Always. There's a credibility problem, there's a trust problem, there's an effectiveness problem, there's all sorts of problems stemming from that. And it's about how you relate to different complexities in your environment, how you deal with problems. And it has to do with how do you deal with different types of people. And how do you, deal with the paradox of authenticity and adaptation? Because everybody will acknowledge both are important. You
Mm-hmm.
want to feel somebody is real, but you also want to feel somebody is really interested in you and
Mm,
in your needs.
mm,
And we know that the most effective leaders are the ones who treat people the way they want to be treated, not necessarily how they want to be treated themselves. Which is the golden rule. The golden rule is treat people the way you want to be treated, but the platinum rule is treat people, and that's leadership, how they want to be treated. And I think
nice.
it's already here. It starts with how do you relate, how do you define problems, and that's also, I think, in your mind, what type of an issue are we dealing with? And in principle, leadership problems are complex, are not clear, or even complicated. Leadership problems are complex by nature, are adaptive problems, as Ron Heifetz puts it, and not technical ones. So the key point there is you're part of the problem. Your way of looking at the problem is part of the problem, and hopefully also part of the solution. If you make that connection, that's dyadic nature of leadership. You cannot, disconnect yourself from it. And that's why the
Mm,
role modeling part is so essential. If something goes wrong, the first question you should ask, what could I have done differently? And not who's to blame or where can
right.
I find a scapegoat?
So you really perceive yourself as a tool or an actor within
Yeah,
that system. That's
yeah,
part of the picture.
yeah.
When it goes wrong or
You're
when it
on the
goes
picture,
well.
literally.
Yeah,
You make a
yeah,
picture of the problem and you're on it,
exactly. Yeah, I
always.
like that metaphor. So that's the role model bit,
That's
and
where it
then mhm,
starts, and then in my conviction, the second thing that qualifies you as a leader, it's non-negotiable. You should be able to coach people. And because the essence of leadership is getting people to move in a certain direction because they want to and not because they have to. So your way of dealing with individuals is the pivotal responsibility. So you need to be able to help people develop and help them perform. It's not either one of the two. And it's not only being nice to people, it's also being a challenger. But it starts with really being interested in people. As good parents demonstrate tough love.
mhm.
It's because I love you, my dear, that I sent you to bed now, for example.
Yeah, right.
It's being nice and loving somebody are two different things. And
Yeah.
it's if a coach for a coach, that is an essential difference. You need to be both a challenger and a caretaker. Huh?
Mm.
Anyway, so that role of a coach, I think you're focusing, your key role is to make others better, and including the possibility that they actually become your leader or your boss, and that you should welcome.
Yeah, that
Because
they even
that's
outgrow
probably
you in a sense, or do
yeah,
even
they,
better.
they
Yeah.
start leading you, and that's why I think it's a good idea to start with that today. So to let them lead you immediately, not once they have qualified
Mm.
to become the great leader of all. No, today. Make them have them make choices. Let them take decisions. Let them say, okay, we'll do it this way, and then follow them, support them. That's where it starts. And
Yeah, I
then
will. If I look at that context, when I look at myself working on Host to Transform and having a community, and at one point I felt really a bit paralyzed, or you could call it imposter syndrome or whatever label you that it suits that situation. But I felt I had to do everything right
yeah,
because, otherwise, who am I to
yeah,
connect this bunch of beautiful minds and kind of lead the way. And
yeah,
I really had to go through a lot of layers of reflection, because you read books and you understand, but it's different from really embodying it. Is that to be human is part of that, is that you make mistakes, is
yes.
inevitable.
And that you
And
need others
yeah,
to make
to
to make success happen. I think a
exactly,
role model is not the same as an idol. Huh?
exactly,
So
yeah.
a role model
Yeah.
is not the same as a perfect human being.
Or a
It's just
guru,
that
yeah.
the idea of a role model is that you know that people do what you do, as well as hopefully sometimes what you say. Uh, Most parents know that, and your children emulate your good and your bad habits. And if you watch carefully, you'll see them grow, and you see those habits become better and better. So role modeling is not about being perfect, and that's a very common mistake. I think people put leaders on a pedestal. I think they have to be perfect, and they have to be visionary, and they have to be gurus, and they have to be real bosses, and and yeah, the closer you get to understanding the nature of a human being, it's impossible. Which is
Yeah.
why most leaders sometimes you can just fall with a lot of noise. They fall off their pedestal
Mm.
because they
Yeah.
first of all they have been held to inhuman standards.
Mm.
Like the hero, that's the next one, is the organizer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. As soon as you're capable of leading one individual, then of course the idea is to shape a group of complementary individuals, diverse enough to meet the challenges of the environment, the law of requisite variety. Diversity is not only a moral thing; it's also an efficiency thing. It's it's also about you have to have different competencies, otherwise you're not effective. And it's also a moral thing to be inclusive, to let everybody thrive, given the spikiness of their profiles, for example. But you also need unity. You also need
Mm-hmm.
them to gel together. And there's a couple of things that you really need to have, otherwise you cannot be part of my group.
Mm.
But then as an organizer, think you're not the hero anymore. They become the heroes. In other words, they perform the tasks.
Yeah.
And you need to support and that's probably the most important and difficult task of a leader. How do you make effective decisions? In the end of the day, the fact, I said it earlier, I think, that you can, the CEO can always take the decision because you're, sort of mandating others to take decisions. So you can also withdraw the mandate
Mm-hmm.
if they deem ineffective. But the fact that you can make the decision doesn't mean that you have to take it. You need to
Right.
make sure that the way decisions are taken is actually helping the group to buy into them. As a fast decision making is not the same as fast implementation. And you see very, very
Yeah.
often see that people who are very autocratic in the decision making have a lot of trouble in the implementation.
Yeah. There's
What
little
I like
buy-in.
about I remember a Swedish CEO I was working with, and I was facilitating a workshop in the south of Sweden, and it was about the core values of the company. It was a large industrial Swedish company, and well, we sort of, in my view, ended the discussion was a synthesis. There was the crystallizing of some points that clearly, I think this is what the group wants. So I said to the guy, I said, Lars Joran, I believe we are ready to take a decision. And then he stood up. I was already standing, and he stood up as well, almost as tall as me. I'm 2 meters. And he looked me in the eye and said, Ronald, we do not take decisions here. They grow. And it's
Okay.
basically what he meant was, you don't have to formally wrap it up always.
Yeah.
If
Huh.
people buy into it, they will start acting like it, and you will notice in daily life
Yeah.
that clearly a decision has been taken.
Yeah. It can
Maybe
become too instrumental in that sense,
exactly.
right?
That's
And becomes
that
complex
in my
again.
view, that's it's probably taking it a bit too far. But
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
positive alternative to
Yeah.
I decide and you go and deliver and execute.
And these are 50 pages of how we mean
Yeah,
it's meant to be. So for me, it's if I interpret it, so what's the role of a well, good leader, purposeful leader, transformational leader, that you kind of set or design like your mom did as well, I guess, the playing field
yeah,
for the
exactly.
students or your team members to play
Yeah,
the minimal requisites to have
yeah,
maximum freedom of innovation
precies.
and being themselves and bring
Yeah.
best self
Now,
to.
there's a big difference between room to maneuver and emptiness.
Mm,
A room has walls, so you always need boundaries. Otherwise, what are you
yeah,
talking about?
yeah,
It's
becomes
then
too
if
fluffy.
everything is good and everything is possible,
Yeah.
nothing works because you have no then, or you say everything works.
Somebody said the other
That
day
doesn't work like that.
to have enough bandwidth,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
play in. I like that
Yeah,
saying. Yeah,
exactly. But
yeah,
not, yes, indeed. Bandwidth fit for the task and the
right.
person in question. So if you talk about strategy, of course, the role of the strategist is to provide some of those guardrails in the form of priorities and goals. And here again, the notion, I think you should not set the goals unilaterally, and it's much more effective to co-create them. I think
Yeah.
you need to agree on the importance of the priorities that you set. If there's strong sense of congruence in the group about the importance of the goals, that's a very strong predictor of good performance.
Hmm.
And then how do you get there? Like in one way or the other, you need to involve people, and you don't just indeed, as you said before, write up a 50-page PowerPointer, so do a roadshow, and then good luck. That's not how it works.
No, people follow
Strategy. So
follow suit.
strategy is about it's about how to make your mission work. So and many people have the tendency to say strategy is such a big, powerful
Mm.
word, something for the board. No. And they make the distinction between operational, technical, and strategic level as if per se the board is strategic. Nonsense. The board
Mm.
has also some operational tasks. So in every task, there is an operational, technical, and strategic element.
Hmm.
Every task contributes to a certain strategic priority and or goal, hopefully. If it's not contributing to one of those, then why do you do it?
Mm.
So in everybody there is you have to have the notion of strategy. Otherwise, it becomes a paper tiger instead of a real life beast with claws
Yeah.
and paws.
And also nowadays with AI and ChatGPT
Good
and
tools, yeah.
great tools, so knowledge is everywhere. Well,
Knowledge
for
has
most
never
of
been a
us,
real
there are
problem.
some censored countries, unfortunately, that there's little democracy for knowledge again. But let's just focus on maybe Europe, a bit more of our own context. I don't want to, be too fast on this topic, but. So even today, everyone can, use ChatGPT to create some strategy or,
Yeah,
it's getting better and better. So
yeah.
I think for
The
me, what
question,
this requires for leaders is to even be more process designed minded
yes,
with the norms and values and to
yeah,
back off and sit on their hands more and to create safety. But and how is that for
yeah.
you? What is the shift you see with this whole?
Oh yeah. I think that shift is sort of partly based on what science tells us. And we know there's a big time lapse between what science knows and business does. It very often takes a
Mm.
long while for business to make up its mind that, oh, actually, there's some new insights. Let's act upon them. Really incredible how long, for example, it's clear nonsense like Maslow's pyramid of needs or DISC or MBTI or so, I think, or for example, or for that matter, Porter's four generic strategies. I basically said, I think there's four strategies or leadership as situational leadership. There's four styles. I think those all there's very sticky ideas, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're relevant
Mm.
or even, remotely true. It
Mm.
takes a long while before a business catches up with what science knows. There's a large skepticism, in my view, from businesses to science when it comes to behavioral insights. And to a large extent, that has been a well-earned skepticism because we came up with solutions like this that proved not to be solutions. And now that we have, as we talked about in the beginning, sort of integrated sciences much more. For example, Robert Sapolsky wrote a great book, a seminal book about the humans at our best and at our worst. It's called Behave. And he integrates neurology, biology, psychology in those insights. That helps, that helps a lot,
It's
actually.
yeah.
There's a lot of things people say about people that of which actually the opposite is true. And one of the most commonly held misunderstandings is the notion that people don't like change.
Mm.
It's the opposite.
It's a really broad
It's
term
really
also.
the opposite. Without change, we die.
Mm.
So there's a lady called Nicole Gravagna who sort of redid the pyramid of needs. And one of the things she notices that people are really dependent on is what she calls novelty. Otherwise, you get Groundhog Day. If every day is exactly the same as the day before, you die from boredom, but also from other symptoms.
Mm.
I'm not saying like food and drink and sleep and shelter that we all have the same needs for novelty.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, of course, some people need a lot of new stuff, and others, do
Mm.
take it nice and slow. But we have the same need. It is just people just don't like to be changed.
Yeah. And to look back also
Understand that?
to your work with other Ronald
Ron Mayer.
Ron Meijers, sorry.
Yeah.
It's like you were meant to get to be
Yeah,
to
indeed.
collaborate.
We have had a lot
Um,
of fun. We are the Janssen and Janssens of leadership development. Yeah.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
You don't have to do any branding anymore on that.
I don't
Uh,
know. People get confused. Who is who?
well, you can
Actually,
experiment with that.
sometimes somebody said, you're actually one person. You're just trying to make fun of us.
Yeah, you don't look that different either in
Yeah.
appearance. No, I haven't met
Should
both of
come
you.
closer to see the difference.
Exactly, I will. So you talked about the pyramid of novelty, well, Maslow, and I think we overall we step back a little bit from pyramid ways of thinking
Yeah,
and think more in
exactly.
paradoxes and skills and
Exactly.
the former
Again, the
podcast, yeah,
dyadic, mutually
yeah,
influencing. Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
so
Paradoxical.
often very difficult for our minds to comprehend, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to get into politics, but
No, yeah,
why politics
absolutely.
can be so messy that yeah, you have to be super crystal clear on the topic and you cannot dilute, but that's not the whole truth. So if we look back, because otherwise I get into everything, to look back to your book and your work. There's 20 leadership styles that you've well identified, and they're kind
10
of
paradoxes.
opposed. Yeah, they're opposed in 10 pairs, paradoxes. We don't have to go through all of them. That becomes a bit lengthy. And I really liked how you guys mentioned what the objective is of these paradoxes, which is flexibility for leaders to switch between
Mental
styles,
flexibility, exactly. Mental
mental
and
flexibility.
behavioral flexibility. Yes.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
for that. And the adaptability. to actually adopt a new style, maybe not for, not your style of preference, but to make, as you say, from a 4, make it maybe a 6.
Exactly.
Because by doing that, you can augment your preferred style even more.
Yeah.
At least that's how I understood it.
The 9-6 principle, huh?
Yeah,
How do
I
you
really
turn
like
an
that.
8 into a 9? By transforming a positive opposite 4 into a 6.
Exactly. And I want to have a little example in a second. And the third one is the responsiveness,
Yeah.
is that in the moment that you can gear, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
ooh, this is a different audience.
Right.
They're fed up with this whole co-creation approach, which I often have as a preferred style. They need to know what needs to be done because they only have 20 minutes. So go, go, go,
Indeed.
go. Yeah. Right. So what is your preferred style yourself? And
Oh,
and the one that is that you still, yeah, you want to pivot towards a 6, or maybe it's already a 6, but I'm sure
no, I
there's still
think
work to do.
as I sort of self-identified as an idealist, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So as you can imagine, my tendency to think back from the future is quite strongly developed. Like I'm
Reverse engineering,
yeah.
a
So
lateral thinker.
I can really imagine the desired situation vividly in full color, and then I need to think back to how it is today, and I always see differences, as you can imagine. So I see a lot of room for improvement. But then this more visionary style, sort of is the positive opposite is the pragmatic style. So if you talk, one of the acronyms related to the pragmatic style is SMART.
Hmm.
And by the way, the SMART adapts that I know typically like the specific and the measurable, but they don't necessarily like the A of acceptable, realistic and
That
time
becomes
bound.
sticky again.
But
Yeah.
it's oh yeah, yeah. Still, you can set a SMART goal, but you still need people to buy into it.
Yeah. No Excel
Anyway,
sheets that
how
can do that for
annoying is
me.
that? But then anyway, but
Yeah.
smart pragmatism is really about, of course, feasibility, and idealism is more about desirability. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, both ends definitely should meet, because you never get to this ideal situation by not taking some very pragmatic, real life, today, here and now actions. And it's not that I don't like to do that; I absolutely do, but because I'm, sort of strongly influenced by the notion of where we want to go,
Mm,
I sometimes struggle to be as pragmatic as my environment wants me to be,
mm.
as you can imagine. So
Yeah.
I tend to be more principled. And so at the firm we both worked at,
Yeah. How
is
did you
there a
do?
reason why we can't name them? But I think,
No, we can. I'm just not sure
yes.
if you're comfortable with that.
Oh yeah,
So,
sure.
yeah.
We both worked at Deloitte, and I remember one of the she's currently the managing partner of consulting, by the way. She said, "Oh, you can be so principled, huh? Not as a compliment." Huh? So yeah, that's certainly says something. Says a lot about me.
Mm.
Um, and then so
And
I
what did you do
learned.
to, oh, sorry. Yeah, you learned. Yeah. To make
Yeah.
it from a 4 to a 6. Yeah. What
Yeah.
did you kind of
So
do?
yeah. So and there's certain elements of pragmatism that I really love. For example,
Mm-hmm.
the idea that you can learn from promising practices others already have tried and tested. So
Mm-hmm.
this whole idea of learning, if you connect that to pragmatism, learning from the best, to know what could actually also work in this context is A, B, or C, you
Yeah.
link it to experimentation. So it's very pragmatic to test good ideas from somebody else in your context and see how they work out and help you achieve your long-term goal. And
Mm-hmm.
then also pragmatism starts to become a joy for me. And there's a
Nice.
great book from um, uh, it's about um, the name, the title. It just I was going to say it,
You
and it
can share it
escaped
later.
me.
I will put it
I
in the
can
show
share, okay,
notes. Yeah.
but it's the art of what works.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Dugan is his name, William H. Dugan. The art of what works, and he focuses on that, and it's not easy, huh? Because I mean it's not easy for any company or individual to know what they're really, really good at.
Mm.
And that's fun. I think you say, okay, what really works here? How do you actually succeed 90 out of the 100 cases? Yeah, you always focus on how to fix the 10 times you don't. But
Mm-hmm.
how come it mostly works?
Mm-hmm.
You should try it.
Mm.
People have it. What do you mean? Hey, what is your success formula? Do we have a success formula?
Yeah, and
Yes, you
that's often
do.
also your
What
your
is
blind
it?
your blind spots, right? Because you take it
Exactly.
for granted.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So
It's
they,
on a
yeah, yeah,
personal
that
level, on an organization level, it's the same. Yeah,
doesn't matter,
yeah,
indeed. And
yeah,
that's how I sort of, I think it's not just good enough to think, okay, I need to improve that, but you also need to motivate yourself.
yeah,
You turn that 4 into a 6. You have to see the fun, the joy of it. Otherwise,
yeah,
it won't stick, huh?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
not, I think, yeah, if people start saying,
You
yeah, I
have to
need
create
to,
a vision story
yeah,
around that again.
exactly. I have to become more patient, then you think, yeah, they're not going to be more patient.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
have to
yeah,
be more patient, but they really, really don't want to. And they
yeah,
think all the others are slow.
yeah,
It's not about their patience, it's about their sloth that they're
yeah,
really worried.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so
Yeah, I can also really resonate with that. Often being at the top of the Himalayas or the pyramids, what do you have already? And then there's still people at the feet
at the
of
bottom,
the
yeah.
bottom of
This,
the
the ski
mountain.
teacher's dilemma. It's
And
very easy, just make some turns and you're down
yeah,
here
I'm
in a
like
minute.
it's
No problem.
it's and then it's still for me also very much challenging, but I love the journey.
Yeah,
So that's
that's
good.
a good start.
And to look back to your current situation, and now I also understand maybe better, but that's also an assumption. So let's validate with you why you work at AFF, as it is called today, right?
Yeah,
Because first I thought, you worked also for human capital and you have a law back degree, but you're more in culture and leadership. At least that's how I framed you in my head.
yeah,
But you work for an accountancy firm and advice. How does that work? But I
yeah.
guess they needed you also to help
Make the
them become
change.
more human
Yeah.
centric. Is
No,
that
I
is
think,
or is that
yeah. So,
too?
but
Yeah.
my core task, that's the funny thing. Also, when I worked at Krautheimer, people who I was coaching thought of me as a coach, obviously. The fact
Mm-hmm.
that 80% of my time I was co-chairman of the executive board, sort of, yeah, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's somewhere in the dark corners. So people know you from what they know you. Yeah, it's what you see is all there is problem. So,
Mm-hmm.
but most of my career I have been in management jobs, also doing advisory work and some teaching and what have you. And that combination I prefer actually. I prefer to do it, I
Yeah.
think, and then just advise or consult it. And then of course then I learn the most. That's basically the
Having the feet
selfish
in the
motivation.
yeah, in the
You learn from
field
your own mistakes much easier than from the mistakes other people make. It's much harder.
make yourself a laboratorium. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's a very strong need. When I moved from Krauthammer to Deloitte, my old colleagues asked, "And is it fun at Deloitte?" I said, "No." In fact, Krauthammer is a much more fun firm to work at, and I
Mm-hmm.
learn a lot. So it's
Mm-hmm.
worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I learn a hell of a lot because Deloitte was at the time I think 260,000 people in 2011, and Krauthammer was 300.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah.
what are the one or two things that popped up that really you took away from the Deloitte experience?
Well, like how incredibly sort of um, humble you should be
Mm,
as an individual
mm,
without losing your drive and your faith that somehow
mm,
you will prevail to get things done.
mm-hmm,
Because it's such a huge group of people, such a big
mm.
system. So
It's a
simple,
world.
relatively simple things like, okay, is it not a good idea, dear colleagues, to put purpose on the agenda and to
Mm-hmm,
actually set a purpose for the global network? It took me 3 years
mm.
to finally convince all my colleagues and the international board to say, okay, it's a good idea to become a powerhouse with a purpose. Uh,
And what
3 years.
how what worked that you put it in one of the elements of the upper current, so to speak, the more hardware of the organization, so they're
Yeah, I
more.
think it was just you know what worked? You asked what worked, right?
Yeah, because I was on that same purpose, to get it more integral in the organization, and they were beyond the stage of vision stories. They were
Yeah,
more
exactly.
about,
It's
okay, we
not
are
vision,
consultants, we just need to do. That's how we are wired. So if it's
not good
part of
enough.
our
No.
if it's part of our talent journey, or it's part of our reward system, or we have to end a project and then we included there how much purpose percentage would you give to this project, these kind of things would work more, more of the tangible hard implementation rather than the stories and yeah, more of the persuasive ones. Was that something that helped you to put it on the agenda in the end?
No.
No.
No, I think it's basically what you said earlier, is that to stop presenting the soft stuff as as soft stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and to present the soft stuff as the even harder stuff.
Right.
And and of course you need to
Mm-hmm.
connect it to the more or less material world, the measurable world, or
Mm-hmm.
the way people view the measurable world.
Yeah.
And it was just to show them there's another world that is even more compelling and more impactful. You need to tap into that world as well.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's just moving sticks. It's
Yeah.
just moving sand from one part of the beach to another. It's
Yeah.
not good enough. And it doesn't make people thrive.
And you're just a brand or logo, which could be anything,
Yeah. Yeah,
interchangeable.
exactly. So
Yeah. Yeah.
the funny thing is, if you look at professions, like the profession of accountant, there's always, there was a day one. So when was this profession founded? Like the baker, and there was always a first baker and a first plumber and a first carpenter. Why was
Mm-hmm.
that? What was their purpose at the time? Now, for some of those I just mentioned, it sounds pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Feeding mouths, giving people this shelter, giving them fresh water, what have you. But what was the fresh water purpose for an accountant? And I dove into the history, and I found that the first chartered accountant was actually sort of very driven by the idea that they had to make sure that as healthy companies who didn't have their administration in order didn't go bankrupt. And bankruptcy is a very painful event, not just for the company itself, but for the societal
Mm-hmm.
context as well, and for the whole value chain. Very often for the families, it's a drama.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a crisis. So if you can prevent bankruptcy by helping entrepreneurs to have a more efficient and a more transparent and a more structured administrative organization, that helps a lot. So actually,
Mm-hmm.
people like banks can see how you're doing. It gives them, it gives them the trust that you actually will deliver. Without that trust, you are nothing.
Mm.
Because money is the same thing. Money is
Yeah.
nothing but a token of trust.
Yeah.
It's a symbol of trust in a government that actually will give you gold if you come back with your banknote, what have you. But so if you make people aware of that, even the most tangible things have a story, and that story is probably actually what really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Then and it took me 3 years.
Hmm. Well, I think that's still fast if you want to do a culture shift, but then
I
you still
mean,
have
that
the
was of course
implementation
just it
part.
was yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, it was part of a culture shift, but also the start of one.
The start of one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I was in it.
both,
That's
both.
I'm sure we can have a glass of wine over that as well. There's
Whether
more
that
to say.
succeeded, yeah.
I think it's work in progress for every organization in general.
Yeah,
But if we focus on where you are at now, right, at AFF,
I call
so
it AF, simple.
AF, okay,
AF,
sorry, AF,
just
yeah,
AF. Never
thanks
mind,
for
but
that.
just AF.
So
It's
what
a, it's
I,
a nice thing. It's a name of a girl and a
uh-huh.
boy. 75% of the AFs in the Netherlands are girls, and 25% of the AFs are men.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
but the point is actually, I think it's just a good name.
And accountancy and advice, right?
Yeah,
AA, that's
yeah.
something I took away from the
And
website.
ABAP and Alpha, so there's a lot of
Yeah,
A's
a
involved.
lot of thinking in it there. But you had a good time
Yeah,
being
we had a good
creative.
time creating it, indeed. Yeah,
And what I really what also caught me on the website is the employee equity and participative model that
yeah,
you are launched maybe since June, once you merged, if that's correct.
yeah,
And I know a bit about revenue-based finance and new modeling and you know, giving employee certifications in terms of getting a share of the organization or the business. And I'm very curious on, well, there's a lot of questions in my mind. First of all, maybe what is the purpose, the story of the new firm, if I can call it like that, that is
yeah,
merged? And why this model and how will that come about?
yeah. Well, the essence of the story is that we want to be a human collective of entrepreneurs that make a positive impact on society by helping entrepreneurs and their enterprises become as healthy as possible. And we do that by standing by at the most important moments, helping them make the right decisions, helping them navigate the difficult moments in the life cycle of a business. We're really focused on enterprises, so not so much corporate as a distinction.
So what's the size, more or less?
The size, well, it can vary, but the average
Okay.
is between 30 and 50 people.
Mm-hmm.
So really the mom and dad type of companies, very often three partners, what have you. So it's really entrepreneurs, enterprises that, and we want to help them with the type of professionalism that is more or less embedded in large corporations, but they don't necessarily always have at their disposal. That's what our raison d'etre is to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that it starts with what is the implicit image or concept of an organization. I think if you look at the model that many corporates implicitly or explicitly embrace is the idea that a business is a machine. You put in some resources, money, you know, people, stuff, as commonalities. What do you call those things? Steel, oil, what have you. And then you have an output.
Commodities, I think. Yeah.
Commodities,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you. And then you have an output, and that's the money for the shareholders. It's a linear system.
Mm-hmm.
It's very production focused, and it reduces people to resources. And it disconnects the owner of the firm from the business. And the disconnection takes place all the time, because when you start disconnecting, you also start to disconnect, for example, your organization from society as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
from the families around you, and from your partners in the value chain, and maybe even from your clients. You see, clients are accounts.
In
They're
sociology, it would call I think the Taylorian Taylor's system,
tailoring. Yeah,
Taylorian
yeah.
system
It's
for maximization of profit, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's Friedman, huh? Friedman,
Mm-hmm.
the moral obligation of a business is to make as much money as possible within the constraints of the law. Okay, within the constraints of the law. So it's a very legalistic. It's not about purpose. It's not about morality. Morality is reduced to compliance, and that's Well, I don't think that's very satisfactory,
Mm-hmm.
and we as a company don't believe that's very satisfactory. So we want to be close, dichtbij.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a large set of businesses. So we are really physically close, both to our people and our clients. We have 50 offices in the Netherlands, and we have no intention of reducing the number of offices. Many people ask that. We don't. We want to stay close. We want to be there. And we know that physical proximity is a very strong indicator of mental, psychological proximity. You don't build relationships with people on a distance.
Mm-hmm.
The more, the wider the physical distance, the higher the likelihood that you start to see the other as another, and that
Yeah,
you start to
we and them.
dehumanize them very easily.
Mm.
But then, so one of the ways for us to make this collective of entrepreneurs, we need a high proportion of a shrinking labor supply. So we need to be an extremely attractive place. Well, the best way to be an attractive place is to offer people the opportunity to co-create that attractive place. You're part of it. You're part of the solution. You're co-owner. You're not just you don't have one role. You're not just an employee, but you're also an entrepreneur, a co-entrepreneur. That's the philosophy. So, and it's, we all know, for example, that bonuses or transactional incentives are very detrimental to any form of collaboration. Whereas we see an organization as a group of people working together to achieve a common goal, which they could not achieve on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that destroys or minimizes the chance of collaboration is detrimental,
Mm-hmm.
including individual bonuses.
Yeah,
The word
yeah.
says it all,
The
individual bonuses.
the
But we
team's high
know,
five worked a bit better.
I mean,
Yeah.
it only works. I've been when I was 15 or was 14, I started picking tomatoes and to make some money to buy music because I was very much into music. And then, of course, the number of crates you output in an hour can be easily measured. And I was the only one running in my lane. So, yeah, I wasn't very dependent on others. Yeah, the crates have to be there. So you could more or less say this was really an individual accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
But in any situation, especially intellectual, where people are independent of the works of others, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Sales is a prime example where it goes wrong because we believe, yeah, this guy sold 1 million or 9 million, what have you, but they never did it alone.
Mm. No, there's a
And
whole value
there's always
chain.
a whole bunch of people involved in the sales process. And by rewarding one,
Yeah, that's
you destroy the collaboration.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
create a competitive, a political environment that is unhealthy. We don't
yeah.
want that. So we don't want, what we do want, of course,
Mm-hmm.
is for everybody to feel that it makes sense to contribute and that it's good to celebrate success together, but also if we fail, we're in this together, we fix it together. So it's much more, I think, a sustainable model than a model where the output is delivered to somebody else who's not connected to your organization.
And what does it mean in concrete terms? I mean, I'm not asking you to expose the whole business
Well,
model. That's maybe too much information, but I also read that 60% of the employees were in favor of a participative model, if I'm
no,
correct.
60, no, I think, well, 60% was the number of requests for
Oh,
participation that we could not meet.
oh,
So
sorry, then I was too
there were
quick.
so many people who wanted to participate. We all let them participate. We just didn't have enough certificates to distribute
Right.
everything to everybody to the extent that what they asked for.
Okay,
So
so
they were
that's
oversubscribed. But
yeah.
everybody is a co-owner,
Mm-hmm.
if only because we give you, when you become a full-time member of our group, we give you 10 core certificates. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody is co-owner. And
And
then,
with 10 core certificates, so let's say that's €1 and the company triples in value next year, then you have €3. Is it that
exactly.
simple or?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's that
Yeah.
simple because it's really indeed that simple.
Okay. That's,
So,
yeah.
and
Let's keep things simple.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's, of course, there's, so if you're a receptionist at one of our offices, which is a very important function because the hospitality that we give both our people and our clients is a main feat of a community. But you can participate if you have the money, and of course we facilitate that with let's say lending
You have to invest a
facilities.
little bit, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but they can make a serious amount of money on an annual and long-term basis. It's both. So it's dividend on the short term, and a value enhancement in the long term.
Beautiful. And how did you came up with this? I mean, the concept of a participative model, of course, exists, but why now? What's the urgency?
Oh,
Was it was it
yeah. Well, the urgency, I don't know if it's urgent.
or the
The
idea?
funny thing is that Alpha, one of the two founding partners of AF, already just established an employee participation model in 1999.
Hmm.
And in that same year, I was still working at Crowdrunner, and we did an employee buyout, not a management buyout, an employee buyout. So we created more or less the same system.
Mm-hmm.
At ABAP, a more hybrid model was created in somewhere in 2006, and we now moved into a full-blown joint participation model. And yes, it is urgent to a certain extent, urgent in the sense that it offers an alternative to the common models of partnership or private equity.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was a partner at Deloitte, so I do see the longevity potential of a partnership if you design it well, but there's clearly also some inbuilt problems attached to it because there's a happy few owners, and you hope that the rest of the company, to a certain extent, strives to become one of the owners one day,
Mm-hmm.
which is not necessarily always a good idea. But it's one of the more sustainable models. The family business, the partner model, and the cooperatives, these are the more sustainable business models. Much more sustainable than stock quoted companies or
Mm-hmm.
private equity based companies. You see that if there's a strong link between the people who work there, if it's a family or it's a cooperative or a partner, and the people who own it, it has the tendency to prolong the sustainability of a
Right.
unit or a group. And it makes perfect sense, if you think about it.
And
If you own it,
if you think more, even more ahead, or if that's the right way to put it, do you think the how big five companies are organized, it's often said as a pyramid, there's multiple
yeah,
layers.
it is a pyramid.
Do you think that's sustainable? Because
Oh,
that's different from
well,
the model that you have at AF, right?
yeah, I think, and I think the way the Big Four has
They're
shaped
having
the
hard
partner
times right
model.
now. Yeah.
Sorry?
They're also having some hard times now, so maybe they're less flexible.
Yeah, but it's I think the way it's been shaped today,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty okay.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, let's say, there's a lot of improvement possibilities. Don't get me wrong. And I would definitely encourage them to think about a more inclusive and more participative model,
Mm-hmm.
and to become and to make the gap between, let's say, the average consultant or auditor and the partner a lot less big. That would
Mm-hmm.
be, I think, more sustainable.
Right.
But it's one of the more sustainable business models. So I don't think it's the biggest problem. I think private equity, depending on how they do it, it all remains to be seen. But it's clear that in general, they have the 5 to 7 year horizon, maximizing their profits in those terms. With a
Mm-hmm.
human-based view, you've only just started to transform the company.
Mm.
So it's way too short
Yeah.
to actually build a sustainable culture in the long run. So it may be, let's say, that in those 5 to 7 years, they actually improve the organization from a digitization perspective or from an efficiency perspective. But I don't believe that in a professional services environment,
Mm-hmm.
the incentive to exit in 5 to 7 years is a healthy one. I don't think so. I think it has a downside effect on quality, because it has a downside effect on engagement, and engagement and quality are intrinsically connected. Plus,
Yeah.
it increases the urgency. You have to perform the output standards, and urgency has also a tendency to enhance the chance that mistakes are made. So,
Yeah, I see some similarities from the political landscape that you have
yeah,
your 4-year term, and then how is that possible if you have to deal with climate change, for example?
yeah,
You get a lot of, maybe more of self-branding action rather
Yeah.
than taking it for the
But then
longer haul.
again, hybrid models are possible. Huh? So,
Yeah,
and those could be and define sustainable. I think
yeah,
ABAP was 100 years old this year. That's pretty sustainable. If you look
yeah,
at the average age of a business today, it is more or less 14 years.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
and so if you really build stuff to last, yeah, you make different choices, and it
yeah.
sometimes is of course you make choices at the expense of your current
Situation.
income.
Yeah,
I did that in this
yeah.
case. So I earn less now than I did before the merger because
Mm-hmm.
the structure is less in my favor than it was before.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think,
I'm
but
not,
it's more sustainable, and you're
it's
an
exactly,
attractive employer, yeah, in the time frame of war on talent, as they call it. Yeah, how to find talent also in the accountancy world. I think it can be quite challenging.
yeah,
Um, and from my point of view, from Host to Transform, we're also starting, looking into a hybrid model, also to license some of the host consultants that we certified to also benefit from the business
yeah,
ecosystem that we want to build. But it's still really like I feel like, do I get the whole picture now, or is it too simplistic, or so I'm still validating as we go, but maybe at one point I will ask your insights as well. Okay, we have a short amount of time, but still a really relevant question I would like to ask you, because in our former conversations, we also talked about that. Since you also have a scientific brain, I feel that, but on the other hand, also very experimental, and I think that's always the challenge, right? Like a lot of organizations want to know that we do stuff as leadership consultants or whatever title you give us, based on science. But then again, science can also be, very context specific, or it's not
it
really
is, yeah,
relevant for that certain moment, and different things are required. But then you don't have maybe the validation or the trust of the client. And I was reading your profile on your LinkedIn, and it says 5 lessons that you wrote on your bio, and one of them was boards typically suffer from conventional logic. And my question is, how can we navigate this as culture, leadership, behavioral experts or consultants, that you don't give them the same as they already have, but to give them something different that they might not even thought of that they might need?
yeah. Well, that's an award-winning question, but I think the precondition, or as Rens van Loon, my former colleague and still now colleague at Tilburg University, says it. Dialogue is condition zero. So the first thing is that you need to create in those boards a context in which ideas are really exchanged and people actually do their best to understand something that they don't intuitively grasp.
Yeah.
Because if they're not open to explore new ways of looking at reality, whatever you do, you can have compelling presentations, have hordes of them. It doesn't help. We know that also from the difficulty of political groups. Huh?
Mm.
The only way to change the notions, the beliefs, and the values of a group is by blending it with people who they accept as their own and who have new ways of looking at it without disconnecting it totally from what the group at the moment really believes. So that's the difficulty. Eh? If you're the outsider, they can see you and say, it was interesting, but hey, let's go back to real life. And if you're an insider and you get swallowed totally by the context, then it also doesn't work because you don't change it anymore. You become part of the problem. So there's a huge difficulty
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
to do that. So you need people who have a strong sense of autonomy, irrespective of the context. They will say what they really believe is true, whilst at the same time being accepted by the group that they're part of as one of the group members that you can trust. It's a good guy, good girl.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it would be
if
ideal if
that
the
condition is not there, if the system is in itself not a learning
yeah,
system,
yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't work.
You
I
cannot do
noticed.
anything. Yeah,
You can do what you want, doesn't know. But of course, there's all sorts of, small and big things, starting with language that you
yeah.
can do. No, we talked about soft and hard. No,
I
I
will
said
never do it again.
it's hard and even harder stuff. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
simple
yeah.
things.
You're so
So
right. Yeah.
people are not resources. You don't talk about people when
No.
and FTE is indeed, it's a way to refer to a way of counting, but it's not a person.
It's very transactional. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
I,
a way of counting. And this whole idea of the McNamara fallacy, that the fact that you can count it doesn't know that you understand it, let
mm-hmm.
alone that you know it. And that's the idea of as what gets measured uh, uh, gets known. It's a fallacy. Huh? You
Mm.
don't know anything without the context and without the rest of the story. So you need to convince those who believe in measuring as the sole way of coming to grips with reality. Think, no, 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 just a start.
Mm.
Yes, I'm sure measuring helps. Huh? I'm for
To
measuring.
scale stuff.
But
Yeah.
it's not enough. You need
Mm.
the context, you need the story as well.
Yeah.
The McNamara
The
fallacy.
process is,
You know that
yeah.
story about this Secretary of State in the US who counted, and it was a bit of a morbid example, I'm sorry, but he measured the success of the US in the Vietnam War by the amount of Vietnamese casualties.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
And he counted. But then what he didn't see is for every Vietnamese casualty, 10 new Vietnamese people were motivated
That's,
to
yeah.
go into arms, the call to arms. So in fact, instead of decreasing the resistance, he had
Yeah.
factor 10 multiplying the resistance every time,
Yeah.
which is how it became an unwinnable war.
Yeah. That's a
And
good,
that's if
well,
you
metaphor almost. Yeah.
I think it's people who focus only on measurements, they typically do not have a clue what reality really looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. I had an example of a client that was so into measuring. They even had a whole department and that was not their core business. It was just to measure, HR things about employee satisfactions and so forth. And they were doing a good job, right? But everyone got a certification in behavior change and very in depth. And I really liked it because, of course, that's also my spiel. But at one point, I'm like, hey, why are we measuring here? It's almost like we are a university, you know? We almost want to have a zero measurement point and do not have any impact so we can actually prove our point. But then, yeah, you leave people there out in vain, not feeling motivated because you kind of want to measure your thing and then you're 5 years further. So for
Yeah,
me, measuring is an intervention on itself,
it
creates
is.
impact.
Yes,
And I'm not gonna do maybe a pulse
exactly.
intervention, how people
If
are.
there's no possible actions connected to the measure points, stop it.
Yeah, then your
If it's
university.
a so what or now what, and
Yeah,
whatever you do, you never answer the question. If there's any real change based on the measurements, stop it. And then
right.
you typically you end up with much less points. Plus, always the idea of being able to put it into context and connecting it with other points. This whole statistical notion of being, I love the example. Where do you think, relatively speaking, more people drown? Well, the answer is more people drown in cities where people wear swimming vests. Now, if you put that as a measure point, stop wearing swimming vests. But of course, that's stupid.
Yeah,
It's just the only thing is, yeah, but it's also the city
the
where more
context.
people swim. It's the
Yeah,
same thing with, we have people from ethnic minorities form a major part of the criminal group.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not true
Mm-hmm.
because you have to look at the societal layer. I think it's people in certain poverty positions who actually make a disproportionate group. So you have to look beyond those
Exactly.
measures to see what really happens.
And
And
then in
there's
some
so many
cases, when you
things.
start to brand that, it becomes the whole
Exactly.
truth on
And
itself,
people
which
start to
happened.
believe it, etc.
Yeah,
It's
that's
horrible, but it's
horrible.
so statistics are a fine tool in the hands of those who want to manipulate reality. Yeah.
Yeah. So, wow, a lot of input. Thank you so much. And as you might know, I'm writing a handbook, a practical handbook, a host guide for human-centered leadership for sustainable people, business, societal change. Big words. I hope I can operationalize it without studying and researching too much, because I also want to be hands-on. And we touched upon a lot of topics, and I'm sure is there one or two leadership principles that you really feel that needs to be in that handbook for leaders, designated leaders, informal leaders, maybe HR professionals, to take with them in the organization of today in the future?
Well, there's quite a lot actually, but if there's one thing, make sure that if you say you want to lead, that you really care about people.
Mm.
If having conversations with people, in your view, is a deviation from doing work, having meetings is, let's say, a not so nice, let's say, interruption of the real work, do something else. Think
Mm.
if meetings are a pain for you, don't become a professional leader. Don't.
And do you have
So
to be a people person? Is
you
that
have
what
to
you say?
enjoy
Mm-hmm.
talking to people
Yeah.
and listening to them and engaging with them. If you don't enjoy that, if you don't
Mm.
care, if you forget names easily, forget faces easily, do something else. Don't become
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
leader of the pack.
Yeah.
And try to find different ways of getting the status, the recognition, and the money that you so desperately seek for.
Yeah.
And
Recall CEO telling me, yeah, but Jessica, my door is always open and people
that's no,
know.
yeah,
I'm
that's
like, yeah,
passive. That's passive aggressive, huh?
yeah,
My door
actually.
is always passive aggressive.
Yeah.
What do you mean? So you're
Yeah.
basically accusing people from not having the skill, stamina, awareness of walking into that very open door of yours.
Mm.
You don't ask the question why they don't.
Yeah, I fed
Yeah,
him with some walk around management articles
yeah,
to
yeah.
see if he had enough
Yeah,
proof to
it's
go do it. And
there's
yeah.
so many, or maybe so few business leaders who actually put their money where their mouth is and say, okay, people are important. So what's the first thing you do when you organize your calendar in the year? So suppose there's 10 direct reports, 10 people who are part of your team. Then you sit with each of them and say, what is the minimum amount of attention that you need for me to thrive? And you
Mm.
plan those meetings throughout the year, and yeah, you can sometimes move them around, but you can't skip them.
Right.
It's a variety of different interactions that you need to plan in advance. So a leader is typically somebody who plans his or her year based on the needs of their team. That's where it starts.
That's the
So
playing field. Yeah.
yeah, if you don't do that, you're probably not serious about your leadership task
Right.
because
Beautiful.
you need to speak to them in small groups, individually. You need to engage with them. You need to touch the hearts and minds. We will say that. For that, you
Mm.
need to be close. You need to meet them physically and not only virtually. And it doesn't have to be every day, but you have to
Mm.
do stuff together, see them in action, not only have them report stuff to you, but go see how they interact with others. So you actually get a clue as to how they lead themselves or how they
And
act.
if they run a virtual company, is there a
It's
way
not good
to?
enough. It's not good
No.
enough. Even a virtual company has real people, so go see them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean, say, if you talk about Krauthammer, it was, like I said, a relatively small company with 300 people from China to the US. Everybody understands that I could not see all of them on a weekly basis, not even on a monthly basis. So we organized it like this, that we met each other, let's say, at least 2 times a year for a week.
Mm.
So you get a whole, you get a reservoir of inputs, and then you can sort of deal with
Yeah.
virtual contact for the rest of the year.
That's a good
But
approach. Yeah.
you need, I think, whether you do it weekly, monthly, or annually, people have to have a minimum amount of direct, personal, in your face interaction with you. Without that, forget it. You don't build
Right.
relationships, you don't get to know them, you don't get to understand them, you don't get to really engage them.
Right. Yeah.
So, and
And
if that's not necessary, all the above, then okay, fine.
yeah,
if you don't need all that, then
yeah,
it's fine with me. But that's not leadership.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So to
I think, but also one, if I
yeah,
may say one thing, I think
sure, sure, sure.
the uh, it starts, of course, with self-selecting yourself. That's basically my point. Before raising your hand, saying, "Hey, I'd like to become the manager or the leader of this group in the positional sense of the word. I want to become the
Yeah.
director of Living." Think about three three duos, three paradoxes that you need to feel you totally are committed to. One is, I mentioned that you need to care about people, and you have to be courageous. So you need to be the one who tells them that they have that the emperor is not wearing any clothes. If you don't have
Mm-hmm.
the guts to share with people how they actually perform, don't become a leader. But you also have to really love them to bits at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, and that's why you tell them exactly how it is. So that's that combination of care and courage. The
Mm-hmm.
second one, you need to, yes, you have to have your own vision and convictions and vision and values, but you also need to be very curious. So it's about convictions and it's about curiosity, because you don't want to have to be led by somebody who knows it all, who doesn't want to learn anymore, who doesn't see things from new perspectives anymore. It's killing
Mm.
the mental, the intellectual curiosity, the intellectual stimulation comes from curious leaders.
Yeah.
You need to challenge the brains, the hearts, the minds of the people, as well as care for them.
I also recall when I also have been a lecturer at various business schools. Oh, something's happening. And often the best sessions were really when I learned as at least as much as the student. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
sense I
exactly.
got that I
Yeah.
was hanging on their lips. What do you mean? And tell me more. And
Yeah.
yeah, again, with the knowledge everywhere, it's more about facilitating that process.
But
For
then,
people to be playful and
if you
energetic. Yeah,
challenge somebody else's thinking, they challenge you back, huh?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
they should.
yeah,
And then the third, so you have so care and courage, you have conviction and curiosity, and then you have equanimity and enthusiasm. So this whole idea that you need to be, you need to inspire people by having an energetic, positive mindset, but at the same time, the peace and quiet to listen and the self-control that comes with it, because there's nothing more detrimental than leaders who are shouting or losing control.
yeah,
You create unsafe environments by being unpredictable and by losing your temper. I'm not saying you cannot be angry at people, but that's
mm,
not the same as losing your temper. Then the
yeah,
anger controls you, and you don't control your anger.
yeah, yeah. There needs to be a reason for that. It's not reactive, but it's
No, and it's so, and
reflective.
people say,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I cannot just be myself. No, indeed, that's not
Mm-hmm.
good enough. Just being yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
also need to be somebody whom others can rely on. And if that means not 100% being yourself, indeed, that's the truth.
Yeah.
You're not. It's not good enough to just be yourself. You also have to be a caring, inspirational person, even if you
Right.
don't want to be.
So you have the book Leadership Agility.
Yeah,
You wrote that with your colleague
yeah,
Ron. And
yeah.
is there any other book that you have read recently or that still resonates with you? Could be nonfiction, fiction that you would advise those managers and emerging leaders that you talk to.
Well, I think there's a small booklet, and it's called Humble Inquiry of Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. And it's
He
Edgar
just
Schein.
passed away, no?
Sorry?
Oh no, that's sorry. Yeah. Now I was thinking, did he just pass away?
Edgar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Did he? I don't know. Anyway, Then but he didn't pass away without writing his masterpiece, because I think this whole idea of humility, together with inquiry, or inquiries, is how he pronounces it, is exactly what are basically the main conditions for dialogue. And dialogue and leadership are indispensable to one another. Otherwise, you never get this human interaction. So, and
Right.
dialogue is more than, it's different from debate, it's different from negotiation, it's different from a discussion. Dialogue is the very special type of conversation in which you really want to understand somebody else.
Yeah.
And for that,
Beautiful.
he writes about different levels of humility, and this strong sense that even never mind how autonomous and strong you are, you always need others to succeed. So
Mm.
that's sort of a fundamental, let's say, sensation or awareness of interdependence. And
Yeah.
then it's about, knowing that you cannot know everything. And it's
Yeah.
also dealing with complexity. There's unknown unknowns. It's not that you don't know everything, you also don't know what you don't know.
Don't know. Yeah. Better
So,
know and better figure that out soon by failing or
and
discovering.
yeah, and adopt an attitude in which people are fine to tell you that you're wrong.
Yeah.
You miss something fundamental.
Yeah, I
You-
often also say if you put all the Einsteins in one room, it doesn't mean life will resolve itself. It's not
No,
that it's
no,
more more
it's not that
ambiguous.
simple. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially
So
especially with Einstein's. I
yeah,
would rather live in a world full of plumbers and carpenters than in a world full of Einsteins.
yeah, here you
Or
go.
if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, let's make an experiment. Could be a nice new TV show that on NPO or something to experiment with. So thank you so much, Ronald, for your time. And yeah, I feel really inspired also by, some sound bites like frozen grief, which you refer to as cynicism, tough love that you need to have as a coach, and sometimes the small comparison with father being a parent. I'm not sure if a leader would like to hear that, but we know what you mean.
Yeah,
And yeah, also the one that, being a role model, treat them as they want to be treated instead
yeah.
of how you want to be treated. Yeah, of course, respect, but how does it look? How does it feel? What does it mean to them? So again, the dialogue that creates that the process of a dialogue will create the magic, and then you get maybe an outcome for the real problem instead of a outcome for another problem, and then you're not going in the right direction.
Mm,
So a lot of learnings for me. I hope you
appreciate it.
enjoyed it yourself as well.
Yeah, it's
And
time flies when you're having fun.
exactly. So I'm launching this to the world. Is there any final shout out that of a question that I didn't ask you or you really love to share still before we making it a full close for now?
Well, I would say never forget that change is a fundamental human need. Never forget that, please.
Nice. The new age change managers to be, yeah.
Or
Well,
leaders or
or
individuals.
leaders, yeah,
Yeah,
individuals, yeah.
humans. Humans.
Humans, I like that. Forget about the titles. Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
thanks again, Ronald. It was really inspirational, and let's catch up soon again.
Cheers. Thank you very much.